Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the English with Kirsty podcast. And today is a shorter episode. My solo episodes tend to be shorter because they're usually just to share something, a story, a tip, something that I've learned or think could be useful. And today I wanted to talk about what I put in my newsletter. But before I do that, if you don't subscribe to the newsletter and you would like to, it's every 2 or 3 weeks, and it has information about the latest podcast episodes and events and other things that I think could be useful for people who are interested in languages and learning. So if you want to get the newsletter, you can sign up on any page on my website, englishwithkirsty.com, and you can find the newsletter there. But this week I was talking about an experience I had, and I had it with Romanian. I think this kind of thing can happen with languages that we use all the time when we just discover that we have a gap in our vocabulary. And I think sometimes these vocabulary gaps could also be in your first language if you're used to talking about things in another language, if your business language is another one, and then you have to talk about some business related stuff in your first language, maybe you have a vocabulary gap as well. But I'm specifically talking about vocabulary gaps in additional languages. And so I was speaking with another language trainer. We were speaking in Romanian, and we were talking about different aspects of running your business, things that you have to think about, things that can be a challenge, things that are fun. And then we got onto the financial topics like submitting your tax return and how it works being a self-employed individual in the UK. And she asked me a couple of questions, and suddenly I thought, oh, I am missing so much vocabulary here because I don't talk about this stuff in Romanian all the time. I think when she asked me, it was the first time I had, and it was like I had to decide, because it would have been so easy to feel out of my depth and think, oh, I don't know this, and how unprofessional, I don't know anything, because that's how I go. You can kind of spiral down into this panic mode, or you can think, okay, well, this isn't going to be as good as it would be in my first language, but I can answer some of her questions in a more basic way. And I think a lot of the time we have this choice, but sometimes we don't see it as a choice. We either go with the emotion of like, I don't know anything, or on a better day we can think, okay, what can I do here to make this an interesting and useful interaction so we can continue, because it's not always an option to use English. I know some people say, well, if you can't do it, but not everybody speaks English, wants to speak English, and it's not always appropriate. So I think when I was thinking about this, what I realized is I don't compare myself to people who speak the languages that I speak as a first language. I don't think when I'm speaking to a Portuguese friend like, oh, my Portuguese isn't as good as hers. It's not going to be, is it? It's not my first language. I don't struggle with that, but I do struggle with not being as eloquent as I would in English, or even if it's if it's Portuguese or Romanian, I struggle because it would be easier in German. Even German is not my first language, and I make mistakes, but I have more vocabulary available to me, so the German is easier. So I think that's what I realized. I compare myself to other versions of myself and find myself lacking. But coming back to this, it's like being on a road where you've got two choices, two different paths going in different directions. One of them is going to make you feel terrible, but it's a really inviting path. Like you can when you start to panic, you can lose control of the situation fairly quickly because you're then being driven by your emotions about what you can't do. Or if you focus on the message, which was one of the points that came up in Roxana's interview that we had a couple of weeks ago now, and she said about focus on the message. And I think that's a really good thing to do, because if we're focusing on the message, it's the other person. What do they need to know? What can I tell them? How much of this can I convey before I really get stuck? And I think that particular day, it went well. some days might not go so well. If you're tired, if you really don't have any of the vocabulary you need, it might not be possible. But I think sometimes we see something that's a bit difficult and we think, oh, I can't do that. When actually we could do it if we took a moment to think, okay, what do I know? What can I do? And we have the choice of how we approach these situations if we feel a bit out of our depth for whatever reason. It could be something that somebody's asked us to do, something that someone's asked us about, something that we feel unprepared for. A number of the conversations I've had this week with clients and friends have been about how some of us can be real over preparers, and we try hard and we want to have everything ready, and that is a good skill set to have because it means that we're organized. But sometimes there's a tendency to over prepare, which means that we feel less comfortable being spontaneous and less comfortable in situations where we haven't got all the answers before we start. And life isn't like that. Sometimes you are in situations where you just have to do your best. And I would rather, in those situations, try and focus on the message rather than on the things that I don't know or haven't yet learned or have forgotten or can't quite pull together as quickly as I'd like to. So maybe that will help someone else. And if you have tried doing that recently, like really focusing on the message more than the how you feel about giving the message, or focusing on what people need to know from you, if you've tried that, let me know. And otherwise, I hope you'll have a good week. Have fun using your languages, and I will be back with another interview soon.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.